You belong in the gutter greedy family threw their mother out with nothing. But she turned street food into $1 million brand. They threw her into the gutter and said she belonged there. But from the gutter she rose, one perfect bite at a time. The Black Korean heritage. Before we begin, a message to every viewer: this story will shatter your heart, ignite your fury, and leave you inspired beyond words. If you believe that betrayal should be answered with unbreakable resilience, that no one, no matter how cruelly they are cast aside, stays down forever, then this is your story. What you are about to witness is not simply a tale of family betrayal. It is a testament to the human spirit's most extraordinary capacity, the ability to transform humiliation into triumph, abandonment into independence, and a shopping cart pushed through rain-slicked streets into the foundation of an empire. Take 3 seconds right now, subscribe, like, and share. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Now settle in. What you are about to witness will stay with you for a very long time. Story preview: 3 scenes to hook you in. Preview scene 1, the cold kitchen. A once warm family kitchen now feels like a courtroom. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead, the kind of light that drains color from everything it touches. Evelyn Harper, 57 years old, sits at the worn oak table she polished for 28 years. Her hands, still dusted with flour from the morning's biscuits, tremble as she signs the paper her husband and children placed in front of her. They smile. She does not know it is the deed to the only home she has ever owned. Outside the window, rain begins to fall, cold, steady, unforgiving. It is the kind of rain that doesn't stop until something has changed forever. Preview scene 2. The laughing family. 2 well-dressed adults and their father stand on the front porch of the house they have just sold. They laugh too loudly, counting the cash from the $420,000 sale. Their mother, Evelyn, stands on the sidewalk with nothing but a small black duffel bag and $45 in her coat pocket. Her son checks his watch as if this is a transaction that has run slightly over schedule. Her daughter scrolls through new car listings, already gone to a future that has no room for the woman who raised her. Their father waves Evelyn away like yesterday's trash, like something that had once been useful but had long since expired. You belong in the gutter now, he says. The door slams. The laughter continues inside. The rain falls harder on the woman standing alone on the sidewalk, the woman who cooked every meal, paid every bill, and loved every person in that house without condition for 3 decades. Preview scene 3, the woman with the carte. Woman in a faded coat pushes a rickety shopping cart down a rain-slicked street at dusk. Her sneakers are soaked through. Her hair is pulled back with a simple rubber band. Evelyn Harper pauses under a flickering street lamp, opens the small cooler inside the cart, and begins arranging homemade tamales and spicy mango salsa she prepared on a borrowed hot plate in a borrowed room. She moves with the quiet, precise efficiency of a woman who has cooked under pressure her entire life, who can produce something extraordinary from almost nothing, because almost nothing has always been what she had. She does not know it yet. But in the next 72 hours, those humble bites will spark the beginning of an empire no one, especially not her family, could ever imagine. Chapter 1. The Forsaken Mother. The Great Betrayal. How a woman built from love was dismantled by the people she loved most. The city of Riverton never truly slept. But on the quiet cul-de-sac of Maple Grove Lane, the world had become unbearably still. Number 1428 was a modest 2-story house with a wraparound porch that Evelyn Harper had tended like a sacred garden for 28 years. She had painted the porch boards herself the summer Diego was born. She had planted the rose bushes along the fence line the spring Isabella turned 5. She had repaired the front step with a kit from the hardware store 3 years running, because Victor kept saying he would get to it, and she could never bear to watch a broken thing stay broken when she had the means to fix it. The kitchen walls were the color of warm butter, a shade she had chosen from a paint sample card after an hour of deliberation in the hardware store, holding the tiny square up to the window light to see how it would look at noon when the sun came in from the east. The curtains were hand-sewn from fabric she had found on a remnant table, $2 a yard, and they had hung in those windows for 11 years. And in the center of it all, surrounded by the smell of fresh biscuits and the low hum of the refrigerator she had kept running through every lean year and every difficult season, sat Evelyn Harper, 57 years old, mother of 2 grown children, wife of Victor Harper for 31 years, and at this precise moment, a woman utterly alone in her own home. She had not always looked this small. There were photographs on the mantel, a lifetime of them, that showed a different woman, strong-shouldered, quick to laugh. A woman who had risen at 5 every morning to pack lunches before anyone else in the house was awake, who had worked double shifts at the hospital cafeteria to keep the lights on when Victor's construction business slowed for 3 winters in a row. She was the woman who had turned every leftover and every nearly bare pantry into a feast that made the neighbors ask for recipes. She had baked her grandmother's tamales every Christmas Eve. She had made tortilla soup from scratch every time one of the children had a fever. She had believed, deeply and perhaps foolishly, that love was a language her family would one day speak back to her, that the home she had built with her hands and her heart was a letter she was writing to them, long and complicated and sometimes costly, but full of the only devotion she had ever known how to give. She had been wrong. She knew that now. Her family, Victor, 59, Diego, 34, and Isabella, 31, had gathered around the kitchen table like wolves in Sunday clothes. The papers were already printed. The pens were laid out in a neat row, which should have been her first warning. Victor never laid things out neatly unless he wanted them to look deliberate. "Just sign here, Mom," Isabella had said, her voice carrying that particular sweetness she deployed only when she wanted something. "It's only refinancing. We're protecting the house for you." Victor had nodded, his gold watch catching the overhead light in a way that reminded Evelyn of every promise he had made and broken over the years. Diego had smiled the same practiced smile he used every time he needed seed money for another venture that would collapse within 6 months. Evelyn had trusted them. She always had. She had never been able to stop. It was on a Tuesday evening, as the rain began tapping its patient code against the windows, that the truth finally arrived. She had been sitting in the living room when she heard their voices from the kitchen, low, careful, conspiratorial in a way that made her stop breathing. Victor, voice low, standing by the sink. "The buyers close in 3 days. 420,000 cash. We split it 3 ways after the lawyer fees. She doesn't need to know until the movers show up." Isabella, a soft laugh, scrolling on her phone. "Dad, she still thinks it's a loan. The way she looked at us when she signed, pathetic, really. 28 years of cooking and cleaning and she still believes we'd never hurt her." "Diego, what about her clothes, the old photos? We can let her take 1 bag, that's generous. The street has shelters, she'll figure it out." A chair scrapes back. Victor walks slowly to the doorway. His voice drops further. "Victor, she should have thought about this before she started acting like the house was hers alone. We built this life together. We are her family, not some charity case who needs feeding every night like she hasn't cost us enough already." Evelyn sat perfectly still in the hallway shadow. Her hands, folded against her sides, did not tremble. Her face did not change. But behind her steady brown eyes something was happening, a slow, terrible unwrapping of every illusion she had ever carried about the people she had raised, fed, and protected. She had known, on some half-acknowledged level, that things had shifted over the years. The late-night arguments that always ended with her apologizing for something she hadn't done. The constant requests for just a little more that had turned gradually into a particular brand of contempt, the contempt that people reserve for those they have taken too much from and can no longer face without shame. But hearing it spoken aloud, in her own kitchen, in voices so cold and so precise, this was different. It was the sound of a door being sealed from the outside. She had given them everything. She had worked through 2 pregnancies while standing on her feet for 10-hour shifts, coming home with her ankles swollen and still managing to have supper on the table. She had forgiven Victor's gambling losses that had nearly cost them the house twice, had found the money from her own savings account, the one she had built up dollar by dollar and never once mentioned. She had bailaed Diego out of 3 failed business ventures without saying "I told you so" even once. She had paid for Isabella's cosmetology school out of pocket when the student loan application was denied, and she had done it without making her daughter feel like a burden. She had loved them the only way she had ever known how, with full plates, open arms, and the quiet conviction that one day they would understand what she had sacrificed, the dreams she had set aside, the sleep she had lost, the trips she had never taken, the version of herself that had existed before she gave all of herself to them. They never understood. They simply consumed and grew, and eventually, having taken everything, decided they no longer needed the source. The front door opened and closed. Their footsteps faded down the porch steps, punctuated by Isabella's bright, satisfied laughter. And Evelyn Harper, mother, wife, betrayed heart, sat alone in the warm kitchen that no longer belonged to her, tears sliding silently down her cheeks onto the table she had set for 31 years of family dinners. In the quiet that followed, she did not rage. She did not collapse. She sat in the silence for a long, measured time, and then she thought about the small cooler in the pantry, the one she had used for years to carry leftovers to the church soup kitchen every Thursday. She thought about the recipes written in her careful handwriting on index cards in the shoebox under the stairs. The tamales her grandmother had taught her in a small kitchen in San Antonio when Evelyn was 8 years old, and the world was still comprehensible. The spicy mango salsa that made people close their eyes in pleasure and ask what on earth she had put in it. The sweet cornbread drizzled with wildflower honey that had won blue ribbons at the county fair 4 years running before she stopped entering, because Victor said it was embarrassing for a woman her age to be so excited about a baking contest. She thought about the $45 in her coat pocket, all the cash they had left her after clearing out the joint account she had contributed to for 3 decades. She thought, "I still know how to feed people, and no one can take that from me." She stood slowly, walked to the pantry, and began packing the small black duffel bag with the only things that truly belonged to her and could not be sold. A change of clothes, her grandmother's worn wooden spoon, the shoebox of index cards, and the small cooler. She stood for a moment in the center of the kitchen, the warm butter kitchen she had chosen and built and loved, and she looked at it all. The curtains she had sewn, the photographs on the wall, the marks on the doorframe where she had measured the children's heights every birthday until they told her to stop. She pressed one hand flat against the wall, like a goodbye that had no words. Then Evelyn Harper closed the door of number 1428 Maple Grove Lane behind her for the last time, stepped into the downpour, and began walking toward a future that nobody, least of all the people she had loved most, could have predicted. Chapter 2. The Invisible Cook, the Silent Survival. How invisibility became her greatest weapon. Evelyn Harper was, by most accounts, an unremarkable 57-year-old woman. She was not tall. She was not loud. She had never sought attention or posted her feelings for strangers to admire or pity. She was the kind of woman that people looked through rather than at, and she had learned, across the long decades of her life, that this was not entirely a disadvantage. Invisibility had taught her to observe rather than perform. It had taught her to listen to what people didn't say as carefully as what they did. It had taught her to notice the small hungers of the world, the kind of longing that people carry around all day and cannot name, until someone puts a plate of food in front of them, and suddenly the name becomes obvious. She had been walking the streets for 3 weeks now, 3 weeks since the new owners had changed the locks on Maple Grove Lane. The first nights had been the hardest. Park benches left her back aching in ways she had never imagined possible. Bus shelters offered only thin protection from the rain. The constant low-grade fear of being moved along by police, of being looked at in the particular way that people look at a person who has visibly fallen out of the world's accounting, was its own kind of exhaustion. But Evelyn had learned quickly, the way she had always learned, by watching, by listening, by finding the systems that kept things alive. She found a small concrete storage room behind an abandoned community center in the East Side district. The building was run by a woman named Gloria Ray's 60s, broad-shouldered, unimpressible who had been quietly running free meals and after-school programs in the neighborhood for 20 years on a budget that would have made a city official flinch. Gloria took one look at Evelyn's steady hands and clear eyes, and the way she immediately began tidying the room without being asked, and said yes to the arrangement without ceremony. Use the corner, use the restroom, use the small hot plate in the back hallway. In exchange, Evelyn cleaned the center twice a week and helped prep the community meals on Fridays. It was a trade that suited them both. Gloria got reliable help. Evelyn got a place to sleep that was dry and safe, and most importantly, had a small cooking surface on which she could begin the work of surviving. Every morning before dawn she rose, washed in the center's restroom with the kind of careful efficiency that comes from learning to do important things with limited resources, and began cooking. The tamales, first her grandmother's recipe, committed so completely to muscle memory that she could make them in the dark. She used the tiny hot plate, a battered pot she found at the Goodwill for $1.25, and ingredients bought with the last of her $45 at the discount produce market 4 blocks east. By 7 o'clock she was pushing a borrowed shopping cart down the busy downtown sidewalk, the cooler filled with still warm tamales wrapped carefully in corn husks, spicy mango salsa in small reusable cups she had collected and washed, and sweet cornbread squares wrapped in pieces of parchment. She did not beg. She sat up under the awning of an old bank building that had been empty for 2 years and waited. The first day she sold nothing, people walked past without looking, the way city people learn to walk past anything that might ask something of them. The second day, a construction worker named Marcus bought 2 tamales, ate them standing up at her table with his eyes half closed in what appeared to be genuine rapture, and came back 40 minutes later for 3 more and a cup of the salsa. On the third day, Marcus brought 2 colleagues. By the end of the first week, a small line had formed at 7:15 every morning, office workers on their lunch break who had wandered over, bus drivers between routes, students who could not afford the food court prices, and had heard from someone that there was a woman on Fifth who made tamales that tasted like someone's grandmother used to make. That was precisely what they tasted like. They tasted like someone had put love into the recipe at the beginning and never taken it out. It was on a Thursday afternoon, 1 week before everything changed, that Evelyn was setting up her table when she heard voices across the street. She recognized them before she looked up. The particular pitch of Diego's laugh, that bright, uncomplicated sound that had once been one of her favorite sounds in the world, and Isabella's higher, more careful laughter beneath it. They had shopping bags from stores Evelyn had only ever window shopped. They had not seen her. They were too absorbed in themselves to see much of anything. Diego, mom's probably in a shelter by now. Can you believe she actually thought we'd let her stay? The house sold in 48 hours. Best financial decision we ever made. Isabella checking her new manicure. Daddy says the money is already invested. We're finally free. No more listening to her talk about family dinners like they were some kind of sacred obligation. Let her figure out the street. She belongs there anyway. She always did. Evelyn stood perfectly still behind her cart, the steam from the tamales rising slowly between her and the 2 people she had carried in her body and nursed and taught to walk and stayed up worrying about for combined decades. She did not call out to them. She did not step forward. She simply watched them walk away down the sunny street, their bags swinging, their voices fading into the ordinary noise of the city. That evening, back in the concrete room, Evelyn sat on the thin mattress Gloria had found for her and opened her small notebook, the spiral-bound one she used to record each day's sales. She wrote a single line that she would keep for years afterward, framed eventually on the wall of her flagship kitchen. They threw me away, but I am still here, and I still know how to feed people. Fear is a current, and courage is not its absence, it is simply the decision, made again every morning, to cook anyway. Evelyn Harper, at 57, made that decision without drama and without ceremony. She set her alarm for 4:30, closed the notebook, and went to sleep dreaming of the pineapple jalapeno jam she had been turning over in her mind for 3 days, a recipe that didn't exist yet, but that she could already taste perfectly. Chapter 3. The FLAVOUR revival the first cart the quiet revolution that began with one perfect bite. What Evelyn did in the weeks that followed was nothing short of quiet revolution. Working within the extreme constraints of her situation, a borrowed hot plate, a borrowed corner, a borrowed cart, she did what she had always done in constrained circumstances. She got creative. She expanded her menu as Gloria managed to supplement the food bank donations with fresh produce. She tested her pineapple jalapeno jam in small batches, adjusting the ratio of sweet to heat until she had it precisely where she wanted it, a combination that was unexpected enough to make people pause and familiar enough to make them immediately want more. She developed sweet potato empanadas with a cumin-spiced filling that sold out before 10 o'clock every morning. She perfected a smoky black bean salsa that a local food writer would later describe, in a piece that ran in 3 publications, as the kind of thing that makes you put the chip down and close your eyes and reconsider what salsa has been doing wrong your entire life. Word spread the way good food has always spread, through honest mouths. Office workers texted friends. A local food blogger with 12,000 followers posted a photograph of the tamale presentation, the careful corn husk wrapping, the small cup of mango salsa balanced beside it, and captioned it simply, "Found her on 5th Avenue. Go now." The post was shared 230 times in 4 hours. The line the following morning wrapped around the corner. The problem arrived in the form of a polite but firm city inspector named Darrell, who appeared on a Thursday morning with a clipboard and the specific expression of a man who takes no pleasure in delivering bad news, but considers it his professional duty to deliver it thoroughly. Evelyn needed proper food handler certification, a commercial kitchen certified for production, and health department permits before she could legally continue selling. He gave her 10 days. She had $43 left. She spent an entire evening sitting with Gloria, working through the problem from every angle. Gloria, who had navigated the bureaucracy of city services for 20 years on nothing, pulled out a dog-eared notebook full of contacts: church kitchens, community center commercial spaces, small business assistance programs that most people didn't know existed. Together, they mapped a path. It was narrow and required asking for help from people Evelyn had never met, which did not come easily to a woman who had spent her entire adult life being the one who gave the help. But she had learned, in the concrete room and the rain and the cart-pushing dawns, that pride was a luxury and survival was not. The church on Alderman Street had a commercial kitchen that sat empty on weekdays, licensed, certified, inspected. The pastor, a man named Reverend Cole who had known Gloria for 15 years, agreed to let Evelyn use it for a nominal weekly fee that she would begin paying once she had revenue to cover it. In the meantime, he would extend credit on faith. He had, he told her, eaten one of her tamales from Gloria's Friday meal, and his decision was made before she had finished asking. Evelyn arrived at the Alderman Street kitchen at 5 in the morning on the first licensed production day. The space was immaculate, institutional, larger than anything she had worked in outside the hospital cafeteria. She stood in the center of it for a long moment, her grandmother's wooden spoon in her hand, and let herself feel just briefly the full weight of what she was attempting. A 57-year-old woman with $43, a borrowed spoon, and a shopping cart, trying to build something real from a sidewalk. Then she tied her apron, turned on the first burner, and got to work. By 9 o'clock she had 200 perfectly wrapped tamales, 14 jars of the pineapple jalapeno jam, 12 portions of the black bean salsa, and a hand-lettered sign that read simply, "Taste of home made with love, sold with hope." It was the name that had come to her at 4 in the morning, lying awake in the concrete room. Not a branding exercise, not a marketing decision, just the truest description she had for what she was selling, the feeling of being taken care of. The feeling that someone had thought of you when they cooked. The feeling that she herself had spent 31 years trying to give to a family that had eventually decided it had no use for her. The first major break came at 11:15 that same morning. A black SUV pulled to the curb, and a sharply dressed woman in her mid-40s stepped out, drawn, as she would later describe it in an interview, by a smell that stopped her mid-phone call. Her name was Carla Mendoza. She ran a regional chain of 8 upscale neighborhood markets that specialized in locally sourced, artisanal, small-batch products. She had been in the business of finding extraordinary food made by overlooked people for 20 years, and she said afterward that she had known within the first bite. Carla setting down the empty cornhusk wrapper, looking at Evelyn directly, "This is better than anything in my corporate buyer's portfolio right now. The jam alone is a category." "Where is your production kitchen?" Evelyn the church on Alderman. "I just got certified this week." Carla capacity Evelyn right now just me. A cart. "I sell out every day by noon." Carla is quiet for a moment. She picks up a jar of the pineapple jalapeno jam, reads the hand-lettered label. "Carla, I'll give you your first purchase order. 10 stores. 100 units per SKU to start tamales, jam, the salsa. If you can maintain consistency and scale to meet reorder volume within 60 days, we renegotiate the contract. I'll connect you with a food business advisor and a packaging designer. Consider it an investment in a supplier I want to keep." Evelyn quietly, "I need to be honest with you. I don't have capital for scaling. I have a cart and a borrowed kitchen." Carla the first real smile, "Ms. Harper, I have been buying food from carts and borrowed kitchens my entire career. That's where the real stuff comes from. We'll figure out the rest. I want this." That afternoon, Evelyn pushed her cart back to the community center through streets that looked different than they had that morning, not brighter exactly, but more possible. She had an order for 3,000 units across 5 SKUs. She had a business advisor's card in her pocket. She had the name Taste of Home written in her notebook, underlined twice. She did not celebrate. There was too much work to do for celebration. But she sat with Gloria that evening and ate the last of the day's tamales, and for the first time since she had signed that paper at the kitchen table, she slept deeply and without fear. Chapter 4: The calm before the storm, the false victory while empires crumble. Another rises from the street. Victor Harper died suddenly from a cardiac event 6 months and 11 days after the house on Maple Grove Lane was sold. He was alone in the luxury condo he had purchased with his share of the proceeds, a 2-bedroom unit on the 14th floor of a glass and steel building downtown that he had decorated with rental furniture and expensive bourbon, and very little else. The neighbors later told investigators that they had heard nothing unusual. The night concierge said he had seemed fine when he came in. The paramedics arrived within 7 minutes and found him in the kitchen, beside the microwave, a frozen meal still inside it. Diego and Isabella received the news while on vacation in Cancun, a 10-day trip they had booked to celebrate what Isabella called, in the group chat that did not include their mother, the fresh start. Their responses were noted quietly by the hospital's social worker who made the calls. Diego's first question, asked before the social worker had finished speaking, was about life insurance. Isabella's first question, asked approximately 40 seconds after Diego's, was how quickly the estate could be settled given that there was no spouse named in the will. Victor had removed Evelyn from every legal document within 72 hours of the house sale. Evelyn received the call from a distant cousin, Maria, who had tracked her down through the church. She sat on the edge of her new apartment bed, a modest 1-bedroom above the production kitchen that she was now paying for with the first real profits from the business, and held the phone in both hands for a long time after the call ended. The room was quiet. Through the window she could hear the distant sound of the city traffic, a bus, someone calling to someone else in the street below. She did not cry. She did not feel the complex mixture of relief and grief she might have expected. She simply felt, for a long and steady moment, the full weight of everything that had been, and then she set the phone down, pressed her palms flat against her thighs, and said quietly to the empty room, "I forgive you." She said it the way her grandmother had taught her to say prayers, not because the person hearing it deserved it, but because the person saying it needed to be free. By then, Taste of Home had grown well beyond the cart and the church kitchen. Carla Mendoza had proved to be exactly what she presented herself as, a buyer with genuine respect for the product and no interest in undervaluing it. The business advisor she had connected Evelyn with was a woman named Priya Singh, compact and direct and possessed of the specific genius of knowing which bureaucratic obstacles could be moved and which had to be navigated around. Together they had secured the commercial kitchen lease, the production certifications, the shelf-stable food handling licenses. Evelyn's tamales and jams were now in 12 upscale stores across 3 states. A regional food magazine had run a short profile, The Cart That Became a Brand, and the week it ran. The online store that Priya had insisted they build sold out of every product within 48 hours. Evelyn's face had appeared in print for the first time in her life. She had looked at the photograph in the magazine, a woman in an apron in a clean, well-lit kitchen, wooden spoon in hand, looking directly into the camera with an expression that the photographer said he had captured without asking for it and had not quite recognized herself. Not because she looked different, but because the woman in the photograph looked like someone who owned her own story. And that was new. That same weekend that Evelyn received the news about Victor, Diego and Isabella were hosting separate gatherings in their new downtown loft, celebrations of what they were each calling, with the unconscious synchrony of people raised in the same household, new beginnings. Diego's loft had been decorated with modern art he had purchased to project a certain image. Isabella's had been renovated with her share of the house money and featured a kitchen she rarely cooked in. They toasted their freedom. They talked about the future. They did not talk about their mother. Somewhere across town, in the modest apartment above the production kitchen, Evelyn Harper sat at the small desk she had placed by the window and reviewed the next quarter's expansion projections. Priya had found a production facility with 4 times the current capacity. Carla had a conversation in progress with a national grocery chain. The wholesale inquiry emails were running 50 a week. Evelyn worked through them methodically, the wooden spoon sitting in its jar on the corner of the desk like a totem, a reminder of the kitchen where all of it had begun. She had not contacted her children. There was a part of her, small but persistent, that had thought about it, that had imagined a version of the story where she called them and said, "Look what I have built from what you threw away. Look where the gutter led." But she sat with that impulse long enough to understand it for what it was: not a genuine desire for reconciliation, but a desire to be witnessed, to be seen. And she had learned in the months since Maple Grove Lane that she did not need their witnessing anymore. She had built something real. The work itself was the testimony. She would tell them when the time was right, when she was certain that whatever she said would be said from a place of wholeness and not from the wound. She was not there yet. But she was getting closer, one order book and one reconciled ledger at a time. Chapter 5: The Grand Reveal, the final resolution. The gutter was never the end. It was where she decided who she was. The first time Isabella saw her mother's face was on the cover of Riverton magazine, a full-cover photograph, the kind they reserved for the person they considered the city's most compelling story of the quarter. The headline read, "From Street Cart to Empire: How Evelyn Harper Built Taste of Home." Isabella was standing in the aisle of the very grocery store she had been telling her friends was her favorite, a store she had described in social posts as the one with the actually good local brands. She was holding a jar of pineapple jalapeno jam, the same jam she had once, in a conversation that had never been meant for Evelyn's ears, described as peasant food, when she looked up and saw her mother's face looking back at her from the magazine rack. She stood there for a long time. Long enough that another shopper asked if she was all right. She was not particularly, but she was beginning to be. Diego saw the brand for the first time in a high-end market in the neighborhood where he had recently moved, a neighborhood he had moved to specifically because it had the right aesthetic, the right energy, the right stores. He recognized the label before he recognized the name. Then he read the name. Then he stood in the aisle with the jar in his hand and felt something he couldn't immediately name, that sat in his chest like a stone that had been there for a long time and had only just become visible. The consequences of their choices had arrived on a schedule that neither of them had planned for. Diego's latest venture, a tech-adjacent consultancy that had never quite materialized into a product anyone could describe clearly, had failed to secure its second round of funding and had folded within 8 months of launch. The loft that had been decorated to project success now projected instead the particular kind of emptiness that comes from spending money on appearances while neglecting foundations. Isabella had developed a medical situation, nothing immediately life-threatening. Her doctors were careful to say, but requiring treatment, requiring time off, requiring a consistency of income she had not managed to build in the years since the house money had been spent. They compared notes carefully, in the way that people compare notes when the news is uniformly bad, and neither one wants to be the first to say the obvious thing. What they had done to their mother sat between them in every conversation, unspoken but present, the way a large object sits in a room even after the lights are turned off. Isabella found Evelyn on a Tuesday morning, standing outside the flagship Taste of Home kitchen on Commerce Street, a proper commercial building now, with the brand's logo on the window in clean gold lettering and a production schedule on the whiteboard inside, and employees who knew the recipes by memory. It was raining. It had been raining when Isabella stood outside the house on Maple Grove Lane, watching their mother walk away with a duffel bag and $45, and the rain now felt like a correspondence, like the world underlining something it wanted her to notice. Isabella stood on the sidewalk in front of the kitchen door for several minutes before Evelyn saw her. She was thinner. She held her coat closed with one hand. She had none of the brightness and certainty she had worn like armor for the years when everything had seemed to be going her way. What she had instead was something harder and more honest, the expression of a person who has run out of the easier options. Isabella voiced small, not quite meeting her mother's eyes. "Mom, I've been trying to find you for weeks. I didn't know where. I didn't realize how." She starts again. "We need help, both of us. Everything we had is gone. Diego too. I didn't come here to pretend that what we did was okay. I know it wasn't. I know I can't." Her voice breaks. Evelyn looks at her daughter for a long moment. The rain falls between them. She does not move to close the distance immediately. She is not cold, she is simply giving Isabella the space to finish what she needs to say. "Isabella, I'm sorry, Mom. I know that doesn't fix it. But I am." Evelyn looked at the daughter she had carried in her body for 9 months and raised for 31 years and thrown herself between and every hard thing she could manage. She looked at her the way you look at someone when you have rehearsed this moment in your mind so many times that the actual moment feels both familiar and entirely different from every version you imagined. She had thought in some of those rehearsals that she would feel triumphant. She had thought in others that she would feel nothing at all, sealed behind the wall she had built for self-protection. She felt neither. What she felt was simpler and more complicated than either. She felt like a mother. She did not reach for her wallet. She did not write a check or wire a transfer or rescue them from the consequences of what they had chosen. That was not love. That was just enabling people to remain the version of themselves that had put her on the street. Instead, she held the kitchen door open. "Evelyn, steady. Without malice, I won't give you money. But I will teach you how to stand on your own 2 feet the same way I learned to stand on mine, on the street, with $45 and a wooden spoon. Coming out of the rain. There's work to do." She handed Isabella an apron and a cutting board. She showed her how to break down a pineapple the way her grandmother had shown her. She explained the ratio of jalapeno to sugar in the jam the way she had explained multiplication tables when Isabella was 7, patiently, precisely, without judgment for not knowing it already. Diego came 2 weeks later. He did not arrive with the same raw humility Isabella had shown. He arrived with qualifications and caveats and a speech about moving forward that Evelyn listened to for exactly as long as was required before she said, simply and without drama, "You can volunteer at Gloria's Community Center on Tuesdays and Fridays. Start there. We can talk about the rest when you've spent some time doing something that isn't for yourself." He had not expected that. He had expected either rejection or immediate forgiveness, either of which would have let him leave unchanged. She gave him neither. She gave him the harder thing, an opportunity. He showed up on Tuesday and Friday, and the Tuesday after that. Gloria put him to work sorting produce and running supply orders. He was not good at it at first. He was good at it within a month. Within 3 months he was managing the Friday community meal prep. He was also, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, in a room where his performance of confidence was entirely irrelevant to whether the work got done. The months that followed were not easy for any of them. The work of rebuilding trust is not linear and it is not fast, and Evelyn had no interest in pretending otherwise. There were weeks when Isabella's progress in the kitchen was real and visible, and weeks when old habits, the shortcuts, the resentments, the defensive pride surfaced and had to be worked through. There were conversations with Diego that stalled and had to be restarted. There were evenings when Evelyn sat with Gloria in the community center after everyone else had left and said, simply, "This is hard." And Gloria, who had spent 20 years building things slowly from insufficient materials, said yes. Keep going. She kept going. On the morning of the first anniversary of the flagship store's opening, Evelyn Harper stood at the head of a long table that had been set up in the production kitchen for the occasion, not a celebration in the conventional sense, but a meal. A real meal, the kind she had made her whole life. Tamales and the pineapple jalapeno jam and the sweet cornbread with honey, and a big pot of tortilla soup that had been on the stove since 6 in the morning. Her employees were there. Gloria was there. Carla Mendoza was there. Priya Singh was there, looking as precisely dressed as ever and slightly more relaxed than usual. Reverend Cole was there, and he said grace in the way that he said everything, with complete conviction and no wasted words. Isabella was there, standing in the kitchen she had learned in over the past year, wearing her apron with the quiet ease of someone who had become someone slightly different from who she had been. Diego was there, having come directly from the community center where he had helped set up the Friday meal. He sat beside Gloria and did not talk about his former business ventures even once. Evelyn looked around the table and thought about the kitchen at Maple Grove Lane, and the papers she had signed, and the rain and the cart, and the concrete room and the $43, and Carla stopping for a tamale, and the wooden spoon and the index cards, and the sleepless 4:30 mornings, and every single thing that had been required to get from that signed paper to this full table. She thought about her grandmother in the small kitchen in San Antonio, teaching her the tamale recipe with the same patience that Evelyn had eventually carried into everything she had ever made. She thought about the way her grandmother used to say that cooking was not about the food. It was about the decision to keep feeding people, even when feeding people had cost you something. Especially then. She picked up her grandmother's wooden spoon from its place on the corner of the prep table. She turned it over in her hands once, the way she always did before she started. Then she served the soup. They said you belong in the gutter. She replied by building a table big enough for everyone. Evelyn Harper had a husband and 2 children. She also had a cart, a dream, and the quiet strength that turns pain into purpose. What she built was not built from revenge or from the need to be vindicated. It was built from the only thing she had ever truly possessed, the knowledge of how to feed people, and the decision made again every morning before dawn to keep doing it. In the end, she did what every honest heart knows is right. She opened the table to the people who had hurt her as well as the people who had helped her, and she let the work itself be the answer to every cruel thing that had ever been said about where she belonged. She belonged exactly where she had always belonged, in a kitchen, making something extraordinary from the ordinary, feeding anyone who was hungry enough to sit down. Subscribe, never miss a story, thumbs up, like if this moved you, share, someone needs this today.